IVM.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Uncle Please Sit. With me as always is my co-host Tushar Abhijandani. Tushar, what's up?
How's it going, Joel? And Joel forgot to introduce himself as always. With me is Joel Pereira.
Yeah, sorry. I am Joel Pereira. Tushar, how's it going?
It's going well. And our ritual of screwing up our openings continues.
Yeah. So at this point, people might actually imagine that we do it on purpose. But let me assure you, dear listener, we are not that smart also.
Yeah, 22 episodes and we still haven't mastered the art of introducing ourselves.
Also with us today on the podcast is Govindraj Ethiraj, who is the founder of Boom and FactChecker.in. Govindraj has been a business journalist and a journalist for a very long time, and a little bit of personal connection over here. Back in 2004, Govind gave me my first job in television back at CNBC. This is what, now 16 years ago. Govind, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And so how's it been, Govind, the lockdown and everything?
Lockdown's been, it's been interesting from a work and personal point of view. As from a personal point of view, I now look at the positives that we get far more time to spend with the family. And despite all the other constraints that we've had to live under in big cities like Mumbai and small houses, living in societies which are run by sometimes fairly draconian secretaries and so on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it's been, but on the work side, actually, we're all mostly digital organizations. So to that extent, work has not suffered in some ways. Maybe it's actually maybe seen more productivity improvements and so on. But I'm still, for me, this is still not a new normal. I don't think a new normal means that we will all sit at home or should sit at home unless it's out of choice.
Yeah.
I think we all have to get back into a normal which is maybe different from before, maybe which is more blended. We spend a little more time at home, but I believe that we all need to get back to workspaces because that's the only way we can build on collaboration and bring out more ideation, creativity, and so on. I mean, this world is good for continuity. We have managed continuity like all of you have, but I don't think this is the best case situation in this form for the future.
I don't know if you remember, but a long time ago, maybe like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when, all these like tech evangelists were talking about remote working and so on and so forth. At that time, it was just this hypothetical idea and no one actually got an opportunity to test drive it until now, where we're realizing, okay, this is nice, but it's not that nice also. This is not like, this tech utopia that everyone was talking about back in the day.
Yeah.
Also today the topic of our conversation is something that we've spoken about fairly often on this show in the past. But since Govind is there, he's the specialist. We thought we'd devote an entire episode to this. We're talking.
This is the other pandemic that's going on.
And because we're talking about fact checking, about fake news and disinformation, who better to have a conversation with than someone who actually spends all his time fact checking the news. But before we get into that talk, we're going to take a quick break and we come right back.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's been a really fun week this week, as it is almost every week, but this week was particularly fun. Parmesh Shahani was on Cyrus Says, great conversation over there. We had a crossover event. Vineet Kanabar, host of the Storytellers and Storytellers podcast, came on Uncle Please Sit. Really interesting conversation about the future of digital content. Besides that, it was the 50th episode this week of Agla Station Adulthood. Congratulations to Ritasha and Ayushi. But yeah, they're 50 episodes down. They had Rekha Jha as the guest on that show. On Advertising is Dead, Varun had the founders of Foxy Moron, Suvir Bajaj and Pratik Gupta on. Another really, really interesting conversation. So full of interesting conversations this week. But with that, let's get you back to your show.
And we're back again with us, as always, is Tushar and Govindraj Etiraj, founder of Boom as well as factcheck.in. So, Govind, fake news is something that is something that, has entered our vocabulary pretty recently. But it's not necessarily new, right? This concept of fake news.
Yeah. So, the thing is, it is not new, and it has been argued by many people that it goes back into distant history. And there are all kinds of examples where misinformation has been used to achieve some kind of strategic objective or for some kind of mischief. And that's true. But I think what we have to remember and constantly be reminded in some ways is that this is a fundamentally different construct. We're talking about, if you just take a country like India, we're talking about almost 500 million people who have smartphones, which equals internet, which equals WhatsApp. Of those 500 million or 480 to 500 million people, almost 250 to 300 million have come into this system only about 3 or 4 years ago. So you're talking about a dramatic increase in consumption from a mobile internet point of view, but more importantly, it means a level of dissemination and at a speed of dissemination or acceleration of dissemination, which we've never seen before in history. So, and very simply what that means is if Joel puts out a piece of information saying, I see a building on fire in Bandra, where you are, and you send it to me and I send it to Tushar and Tushar forwards it to someone else, because of the nature of this, without knowing whether it's true, it would have reached 1 million people maybe anywhere between a few hours to a day's time. Right? So that is the power of misinformation, which could not have happened in this form ever before. And in this case, maybe you've seen that fire and you're obviously spreading it because you want to alert friends, family, and so on that, watch out for this, or you just want to share this piece of information. In many cases, when we talk about misinformation or fake news, we are also talking about industrial complex of generating misinformation and disseminating it. And this is happening across the world in many countries. And perhaps the first signs of that industrialization or the industrialized approach to manufacture and dissemination of misinformation came after the 2016 US presidential elections, which is when we also started our active work focusing on misinformation.
So, you were talking about earlier in the past, about the building on fire and me spreading this information around. Are you saying that the root of, like for instance, some misinformation has an altruistic value, even
yes,
though,
of course, though
it's fake?
Yeah, and we see it happening in health and medicine all the time. We have, if you look at just COVID-19 and the amount of shares and forwards about treatments, including pumping steam up your nose, so, and it's all sent in good faith. It's sent by people who believe that it works, or maybe have used it and feel that it has worked for them, though there's no scientific evidence as such. Or it could be many other kinds of cures. It could be with some kind of alternative remedies, traditional remedies, or saying that it just doesn't matter. Because I haven't, I have not been wearing a mask. I've been walking around. Nothing's happened to me. And it's true, nothing will happen to you because statistically you may be one of those who will never get it. But that doesn't mean you're vulnerable. I mean, everyone is immune, right? And those who will get it will suffer quite badly.
No, this reminds me of, when I was a kid, my dad used to work in America and I was there as well. And for a bit. And I remember we got a letter, an actual posted letter that talked about why Coca-Cola is so harmful to you. About like you put a glass of, pour in a glass of Coke and drop a nail in it, and the following day the nail will have dissolved and Coca-Cola is used. And at the end it said, it's very important that this information is shared widely, and this is the kind of stuff that the soft drink industry doesn't want you to know. Copy this letter 7 times and send it to 7 other people that you know. And I was like, wow, this is basically a WhatsApp forward before its time.
Right. So, Joel, I think that's a very important point, and that's really, in some ways, one of the foundational reasons behind this rapid spread of misinformation that we're seeing, which is that the lack of or the loss of trust in mainstream or traditional media. So the reason why that message, and many of our WhatsApp messages and forwards also say the same thing, right? You will not see this in a Times of India, or you will not see this in mainstream media. Mainstream media will prevent this from getting to you, is because it plays on a trust deficit that already exists. If you ask most people now, and more so younger people, whether they read mainstream media or they trust mainstream media, you'll find that the answer to both is either a flat out no, or it will be a maybe or a likely or something like that. So, and the entire edifice of misinformation builds on that lack of trust, and has obviously got perpetuated in the last few years.
How responsible do you think is the media for this lack of trust?
How responsible is the media?
Yeah.
So that's a little difficult for me to answer. I mean, I'm also a mainstream media journalist in that sense. I mean, I'm a journalist, but also have spent most of my life in mainstream media. I think, it's there is media and there is media. So I've been a financial journalist, for example. My world is revolved more to do with companies and announcements and balance sheets and corporate actions and products and services and so on. There is a reason why media has lost trust. Either because people feel that it's not reported on things that deserve to be reported, or it's not reported on those events accurately. And there is some truth in that too. Now, I'm not getting into the leaning part of it. I'm just saying that whether or not you are reporting things which should be reported or actively reported. So it could be, I don't think there is a single event, but it's obviously a multitude of events over time, which has led people to form a larger conclusion that you cannot believe what mainstream media is giving you. And it's a very different discussion, so that's why I don't want to get too much into it. But it's a fact that there is a trust deficit, and because of that trust deficit, this phenomenon has further grown. I'm not saying that if there was no trust deficit, we would not have had fake news. All I'm saying is that it compounds the problem.
One, expanding on what you just said, though, about the trust deficit, this might sound a little like crazy and conspirational, whatever, but don't you think that new media, like for instance, social media, etc., has also had a role to play in conveying this idea that the traditional media is not to be trusted, that, they are the monolith and we are to use a tech word, the disruptors and so on and so forth? Do you think there's...
they may not say it, but yes, it is a fact that social platforms are disruptors. But social platforms also distribute mainstream media content. And at the end of the day, if your mainstream media brand is strong, powerful, revered, trusted, then you're fine. Then you will as much consume it off a Facebook or a WhatsApp or wherever it comes, without paying attention to the platform and the platform's identity. But if the brand is weak, or the sources are weak, then you have a problem. Then the platform becomes more powerful than the brand. Today, it's unlikely that, let's take a good case example, not the best case, or at least a good case. Suppose you take New York Times. New York Times, if I read New York Times via Facebook or on Google search or wherever it is, it's still New York Times that my relationship is with. But if it's not, then I'll say, I saw it on Google, or I saw it on Facebook, because there's no brand which sort of is sitting above it or has greater trust.
But when it comes to, we were talking about earlier, the people who would spread, I'm not, the creation of fake news, etc., we'll get into in a bit, but I'd like to talk about how it spreads right now. So we've already spoke about someone who has, say, there's an altruism involved over there. I have this bit of information that I think is important that I must spread to other people. But then there's also a concerted effort to spread this kind of news. I think you briefly mentioned it in the industrialization of fake news. Could you tell us a little more about that?
So what I'm saying is that there are people and organizations who are waiting for events to happen and have used events which may not be connected to anything specifically, but have used events to build some sort of misinformation narrative or narrative of misinformation.
Okay.
And we've seen this time and again in India. We've seen it actively for the last 2 years, and it's only increasing as we speak. And this happens in other parts of the world too. So, and a lot of this is obviously in the social political space. But but that's where the industrialization really comes in.
Okay. Could you give us an example of one of these? Like you mentioned the Trump election in 2016.
Yeah. So let me use the same example.
Okay.
So and because that is the most well documented. I mean, I cannot use. I mean, I would love to use examples from India, but India, I can only see the outcome. There is no investigation that I have or we have done to establish source. And without that, it's not fair or correct to start calling out people. So if you look at the US example, I think there is enough documentation that there was content that was being created by, let's say, people, young kids in Macedonia, were essentially fake on websites. That content in turn was being used by people who were working with organizations like Cambridge Analytica to do very, very sharp targeting. So if I know that Joel leans this way and is likely to consume content that way, which in turn, over time, if I keep sending him this, will make him form a certain perspective, then I will do so. So I may send you a lot of general stuff, but also I will keep, including some bits of, or maybe regular bits of fake news articles saying Hillary Clinton is a witch or Donald Trump was blessed by the Pope and so on. Which will all land into your inbox or your Facebook page. And because you are not likely to question it at that time, and more so remember in 2016, people didn't know. The sense of knowledge, and even today, with all that knowledge, people still believe. So at that point, it was even less. So you continue to consume it. And because, so technology allows me to understand you. I mean, there was a point when maybe, I think Cambridge Analytica had something like 8,000 data points on you. And that is phenomenal. So as Christopher Wiley, who wrote a book on this, who was an ex-Cambridge Analytica guy, it was almost like even the software would know you better than your own spouse.
Yeah, I remember reading that. It was
right, because and that's the power of software. Because like for instance, we're all on computers now. When I'm selecting things, reading things, exiting certain things, looking at a certain site, all those data points give insights on my behavior and my psychographics far more than what I would even tell people. Yeah. Actually, these are things I may not know myself, because there are things that I do subconsciously, like I move from one thing to the other and all that. But it's all giving off signals of what my preference is, behavior, and aptitude, and so on. So anyway, so that's how technology was used. And it obviously had an impact, whether either in the winning of Donald Trump's victory or Hillary Clinton's loss.
But we were talking about this something like a Boom Live, right? Which is a relatively recent concept only. The concept of fact checking itself. Yeah. Has it existed in the past in other firms?
So I'll tell you. So we started factchecker.in in 2014, and the whole idea then was, and I'm talking about 2014 elections, and the whole idea then was that we want to fact check statements made by people in public life or institution. So if Ministry of Power says we've electrified everything, all villages in India, then that's a statement you could fact check using the government's own data. So it is data based.
Right.
If some individual who's, let's say, holding a position in government says we have done this, or we have opened up so many areas for fresh investment, I mean, you could fact check that by looking at the government. So that is what factchecker.in did and still does. Boom was responding to a different phenomenon, which is really the subterranean, which is not stuff that you can trace back or connect with individuals or people. So there is what Boom does is typically looks at videos, text, images that flow through the netherworld of information flow, which is in a very complex way of saying that basically stuff that lands in your WhatsApp inboxes from your God knows who. Because when I say God knows who, meaning I know that you've sent it, but you may not be the author of it. I mean, you may be the 1 millionth person who is forwarding it or sharing it, as the case might be. So, and this is really the nature of misinformation or fake news, because you don't know where it comes from. You often don't know whether it's targeted at someone. Is it altruistic, as you said? Is it part of is it designed? And yet has devastating impact. In 2018, more than 30 people died in this country because of rumors of child kidnappers on WhatsApp videos. And India is the only country where we've seen that kind of impact, where misinformation can actually lead to life being taken. I mean, misinformation, the problem is there everywhere, but here compounded with maybe access to law and order or law and order breakdown, people, so anyway, so lives have been lost. And because people believe those pieces of misinformation. So that's why misinformation or fake news is a different category when, and you're dealing with a much, much larger landscape or an arena than compared to just fact-checking statements made by people in public life.
How difficult is it to do this in India? In the sense, because I mean, sometimes I've seen even official information and press releases having wrong information. So how do you not look at this and go like, how are we going to do this?
I mean, that's a very good question, and that comes to the process that we follow. So we do three things broadly. So first is we use a lot of tech and tools. Some of it is proprietary to us, but most of it is actually publicly available. I mean, Google reverse image search and so on when it comes to images. The second is we try and do research where there is some kind of research involved. I mean, who are the people who might have said the statement? If there are known people involved. Has this been said before? Is there a data angle to it? Sometimes there is a data angle to it and we would verify. So that's the research part. The third and the most critical part, which takes up all the effort, is the journalistic part. Because finally, there is no substitute to journalistic verification. So for instance, if there's a video where you see three policemen who are seemingly firing at a crowd, saying that, this happened in Guwahati this morning. And so we would check. And then what we would do is really call up a senior police officer or superintendent of police in Assam or Guwahati, as the case might be, and ask that person, there is this video or image that's going around. Can you please tell us whether it's true? And that becomes the basis for our article or our output, saying that, this is the image, but this is where we found that it's not true because we've spoken to someone in authority, in many cases in law enforcement itself. So that's what makes our final output. So if you're not able to do that, then we will not touch it. We will not put out something that we cannot independently and authenticate at source. We will never go by, so-and-so newspaper has said this or so-and-so television channel has said that. No, we will always go to the source. And if we cannot get the source, then we will not touch it.
Makes sense. No, and also I was thinking, actually the third point that you mentioned, I feel like it's also part of the genesis of fake news in some ways, because a lot of people, now journalism is sort of decentralized. I mean, because a lot of individuals are reporting stuff, putting out blogs, tweets with supposed news information. And I think for a lot of people, journalism seems to be just gathering facts as opposed to making sense of facts. And I think just a lot of people just put out information without context. Do you think that happens a lot as well, in the sense like...
I mean, it does happen. I mean, see, journalism is also very broad and wide, right? I mean, there are, I don't know what the last figure is, but there must be 20,000 plus periodicals and dailies in this country. Let me fact check that figure for a second. I don't know, I think it's higher than that. But there are so many. So all of them, may not exist for maybe the right reasons. Even if they exist, they may not obviously do a competent job. So it's tough. I mean, it's tough to say that, this one is doing a good job or that one is not doing a good job or whatever. I'm just saying that because of the sheer number of entities we have in this country, it is not feasible that all of them will be as competent or good at doing a holistic, well-rounded report on any issue, like the one like you pointed out. So, I mean, unfortunately, that's a part of life. So, I think it's more than 100,000 newspapers and periodicals.
Wow.
And I guess about 350 to 400 news channels. I don't know what the exact number is, but surely over 300. So, I mean, that's a very large number. I don't think there is enough talent and skill and training to produce high quality.
Actually, I wasn't even referring to them. I was referring to how just, the citizen journalism concept, in the sense, just regular people who've decided that they are journalists now on the basis of the fact that they present stuff.
Yeah.
Which they claim is news.
Yeah, so they do. I mean, and many of them are doing it, but I guess eventually, and many of them are very popular or more popular than maybe established this thing, and we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But I think if you're so it's a media literacy issue. So if you're a consumer of news, finally, you have to be careful about where you consume it from. So, I mean, we're always, I try to split this issue into two parts. There's a demand side problem and a supply side problem. I think we're talking about the supply side now. I mean, I think this problem or issue cannot be addressed beyond a point on the supply side. It has to be addressed on the demand side. So we have to train ourselves, train our children to know what is good and bad in a very relative sense. Also to build your own sources of trust, and very carefully so. So if I want to believe a citizen journalist reporting on a house on fire in Bandra, sure, but or should I be trusting, let's say, since we are in Mumbai, a Mumbai Mirror or on Indian Express or Times of India, because I know that for these issues, they will put people with some training on ground. They will check, they will speak to the fire brigade, they will speak to maybe the people who own that place and give me a sense on what really happened. The citizen journalist will not have access nor the training to ask the next set of questions, which are also important. I mean, maybe he'll say, he or she will say there's a fire and this is my opinion on this fire, but I mean, and people will consume it like that, but I think we have to be careful and mindful and all of us on what we consume, how we consume, and that in turn is linked directly to the problem and challenge of misinformation. Yeah. Misinformation and fake news flourishes because we as consumers are not alert and not aware of what we're consuming and how we're consuming.
Govind, expanding on what you just said, where you said the best way to counter fake news is with real news, right? Or with real sources. But it's also I don't know if you've seen this study that was done by MIT, the MIT Media Lab some time ago, where they said that fake news stories are 70% more likely to be retweeted than true stories.
Yeah.
Or that true stories take 6 times as long to reach a certain X number of people than it takes fake news. So, sometimes it feels like taking a drink from a fire hose. How do you begin to combat something like this?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it's a 2018 study in which MIT did, and there have been many studies after that as well. It is a fact that more people will believe the misinformation or fake news because it sounds interesting. That's the other part of the studies is. Yeah. It sounds interesting, it sounds juicy, and that's why you believe it. The second is that in maybe 20% or more cases, people will believe the fake news despite being shown the true news because they just like to believe it. So it enters a realm of fiction. And it's like saying that, there was I'll give you an example of this photograph which showed Nirmala Sitharaman, who was then defense minister, standing with this girl next to an aircraft, like a fighter jet. And she was a pilot and saying that, oh, look at Nirmala Sitharaman's daughter. And she's a pilot and she's the minister of defense and all that. What a lovely thing. So this was fake. But when pointed out to people, they said, so what?
Yeah.
So what? It's a nice story. So this is a very deep psychological issue. I mean, that people are willing to suspend belief because they like something. So it didn't matter that it was fake, and Nirmala Sitharaman did not have a daughter who was a fighter jet pilot or a fighter pilot. But it mattered that someone presented this narrative, and they wanted to believe a narrative like this. And this is where the purveyors of misinformation use these kind of emotional tags and keys very, very powerfully.
So, like you said, people would spread fake news because it feels good or it's a nice thing, that even if it's pure fantasy. Or coming back to what we were talking about earlier, this need to be a good person and spread information that you have. But how do you then de-incentivize something like this, or to counter it, incentivize the truth, or the truth as is backed by facts?
So you cannot, I don't know if you can incentivize. You're appealing to people's better sense. And my sense is that in the world we're in, where things are so polarized, And I usually, I mean, a lot of people will first say that, okay, which side of the divide are you, and then talk to you. You know, or even listen to you, or even agree to talk to you, you know. So in the sense that, I mean, all, let's say, attempt, or I mean, any kind of debate which is truly, productive, which is, means having multiple points of view and agreement, disagreements, is out of the question, because you've decided that I'm not going to agree with someone. So, I mean, in that context, I think it's very difficult to actually convince someone that what you're doing is wrong, or hear me out because I have the true picture. Because you've decided that you're not going to believe me either ways. You know, because where do you think I stand? Not where I stand, but where you think I stand. And we are in this world right now. So, I mean, we can't run away from it. So I think it goes back to maybe this generation is lost in some ways. I mean, I would really say that, and we do some work in this space as well, that let's focus on young people, including children in schools and so on, and teach them and try and educate them on developing critical thinking about how they consume information and how they accept or reject what is coming to them via the World Wide Web, of which misinformation is one part.
Is there any correlation though between say levels of education or levels of awareness or sophistication?
No.
Or is there even a demographic, or like is there a small town, big town difference? Or
I don't think so. I mean, I could say that, but I think I'll be being unfair to someone because I don't have enough data on both sides. I could say that yes, for instance, if you look at the lynchings that happened of those people who are suspected to be child kidnappers, I mean, some happened in villages, but some happened in cities.
Okay.
You know? And there were others who didn't die, but they were beaten up, and the police saved them in time for the same reason. And those happened in cities like Bangalore and Chennai and so on. So or Hyderabad, if I remember correctly. But they happened in cities as well. So there's no the rural really as such. Beyond a point. The second is that there's nothing to say that people who are educated are better off. I mean, maybe there's an element of what they call digital literacy. That should you believe everything that you see on WhatsApp? And which again has nothing to do with whether you're a PhD or a BCom pass, or even a school dropout. So, I mean, maybe those who study this and are studying this more carefully will have better insights. But I'm just saying at a very anecdotal level, I've seen no connection between the two. I find very educated people, quote unquote, completely falling for stuff which, and you can see it on social media, and even circulating stuff which clearly is not true, but because they like it. We've had. There's no harm done, so let me circulate. But
we've had cases where like so-called captains of the industry have sent out forwards and tweets and things like that, and have been pointed out. It's like, hey, and these are people who you'd imagine would not fall for this kind of stuff.
So they maybe they feel that this is an interesting thing, so there's nothing wrong in it, and so on. But it's unfortunately that does damage the larger cause, because it damages the cause of having a filter before you consume something. More importantly, using that filter before you send it out to other people. So
one thing that I'm sure you guys are looking at a lot of is this concept called confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Is confirmation bias pre-existing, or how does it begin? Could you just tell us a little bit about it?
I think, I'm not an expert on this, but I think it's if I would look at it simply, it is to do with my thought process, my ideology, and all of which has become maybe more sharply defined in recent years. And then basis that me consuming something or believing something. If I believe that Western medicine is hogwash, then anything I hear or read about a cure for or the work on the cure for COVID, I will dismiss. If I believe that alternative medicine is the only cure, I will believe anything that you send my way. So that is confirmation bias. I'm talking about medicine in this case, and it can apply to anything.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to people who create fake news or organizations that create fake news, we know there is one political side of it. And there's a political benefit for them by spreading this fake news. But what about the others? Like in the sense, like the guys who made all the WhatsApp forwards about COVID and stuff like that. How are these people benefiting from fake news?
So I don't know. I mean, I think some people is just mischief.
Yeah.
Some people, it kind of fits with some cause that they're mildly associated with, or they believe they should be espousing. If you look at vaccines, I mean, that's another big challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of misinformation about vaccine news. People are not taking vaccines because of that. And we've had measles outbreaks, even in cities like New York, because children have not taken vaccines and it's spread. So now, how people form that position and what brings them there, I'm talking about the parents, it's difficult to say. I mean, we know, why it happens and how it happens, but why a particular person will develop that thought process versus someone else who may not, within the same family, it's a matter for deeper and separate investigation. I mean, it's just that I'm not qualified to do it, except to say that I know it happens.
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge it.
Like you mentioned the New York Times earlier, right, as one of the standards for fact or good journalism or whatever. But, I was reading while researching for this podcast itself that apparently in New York, you had these, the fight between the Pulitzer-owned magazines and the Hearst-owned magazines. The background for the concept of yellow journalism is like almost more than a century old.
Yeah.
But still, you had the Americans or even in the UK, they regulated themselves, and they introduced quality control and so on and so forth. Do you think that could happen here in India, considering the state of our media right now? I mean, we've got our national news networks chasing this Sushant Singh Rajput thing. And, we've had fake news being covered, not by some small town, I'm talking about national news networks. Why would they, do you think that they would regulate themselves?
I mean, they should, but they should, and maybe their news desk should pay more attention before, instantly disseminating something that comes from WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's not for me to comment on it. I mean, to me, if that is what they want to disseminate for, obviously the objective, if you're talking about television, obviously the objective of meeting their daily TRP, targets or weekly TRP targets. I mean, good luck to them. And if there are people who are consuming it, most likely knowing this to be true, then good luck to them too. Unfortunately, self-regulation is exactly that. If you do not want to self-regulate, or if your business model does not allow you to self-regulate, or your business model is built around actually fighting that self-regulation or basically breaking free from the regulation, then that's what we have.
But when you talk, so, you have situations, like you said, where people lost their lives, like in the 2018 lynching incidents.
Yeah.
Do you think that the government should come in to regulate the spread and dissemination of fake news? I know there have been attempts, but they've not been super successful.
No, I don't think. Yeah. So I think the government should, I don't think the government can or should do much on the supply side. Or be careful of what it does, because it could be tantamount to controlling freedom of speech. But what it should focus on over a medium to long term is the demand side, on the education, on the information, on the sensitization, on developing critical thinking, on including all of this into curriculum or curricula, and essentially, focusing on the next generation and making them truly far more aware and alert netizens, so to speak.
But do you think that, that is something that is that's like a long-term idea, right? Well, in the meantime, there's a lot of stuff.
It is a long-term, but see, the government even today, technically, if you spread fake news and you're caught, there are at least 4 or 5 sections of the Indian Penal Code under which you can be hauled up if you're caught. So, there is technically, there are ways to go, control this at source, but I don't think that makes a difference. Unfortunately, what happens is governments are being governments wherever in the world will overreach. So I can say that what we are discussing, if suppose someone says that, what we are discussing also is tantamount to fake news because it's a discussion on fake news, so, and therefore it should be banned. So I mean, I don't know. I'm not comfortable with the idea of government, being an arbiter in this. Beyond what it's the powers that it already has in under the Indian Penal Code. I mean, under the Indian Penal Code, or everything that you can do in involving law enforcement.
One of the things that people are talking about now, especially in India over the last couple of weeks, were the social media platforms and their role in spreading fake news, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's, your web searches, etc., etc. In Europe, I believe in Germany, which has some very strong anti-hate speech laws, the governments are holding the platforms directly responsible, Do you think that is something that should be done here as well?
So I think platforms, let's take a step back. Okay, so if you look at all your big platforms, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Google itself, which is not a platform, Google is a search engine.
Correct.
Most of them, or Twitter for that matter, most of them are only about, let's say, maybe 11 to 13 years old. YouTube only recently, a few years ago, celebrated its 10 years. So,
yeah.
I mean, Facebook is about 14 years, I think. I mean, yeah, whatever. I mean, you're barely little more than a decade is the whole point. So this is all new. Okay. So when they were set up, most of these platforms were set up with a very libertarian, free market way to approach to information and information sharing. It was about, this is free. Anyone can come. I mean, even if you look at Wikipedia today, it's still the same, right? It says that anyone can come and edit and counter edit if whatever. So, so that is the philosophy on which this was built, or these were built. I think over time, what has happened is it's clear that free speech cannot be completely free. So therefore, you cannot allow, let's say, jihadi videos, on YouTube, because while yes, it may be someone's free speech, it's clearly not something that this, other people should be seeing and so on. I mean, I'm giving you extreme examples.
Yes, of course.
I think as the time has passed, and more so in the last couple of years, I think everyone has realized that this form of complete free expression is not something that's tenable. And therefore, the social platforms need to self-regulate and manage and bring down the amount of, let's say, misinformation, including that is served with a malafide intention. And my understanding is that different different platforms are responding to this differently. These are all technology companies. I mean, their first reaction always is to use technology to find the solution. But equally, I think people have realized, I mean, we work with Facebook, for example. I mean, Facebook acknowledges that for the most damaging misinformation, there has to be physical verification. Or physical authentication and journalistic authentication, which is what people like us do. And so you combine that with technology, where you use, let's say, high-end artificial intelligence or machine learning, and then you sort of start bringing it down. But this is an ongoing battle. It's not something that you can say that I started it yesterday and I'll have results today. I think it's an ongoing battle. It's our responsibility as citizens, users, governments to keep the pressure on social platforms to keep evolving. Because these are, I mean, this is, you have to remember that when Facebook was created, it was a boon to many people because for the first time you connected with classmates, friends, you were able to show off those lovely beach pictures.
Yeah.
And it gave you satisfaction of some sort, right? And even today, you're still connecting with people and finding long lost friends or so on because of Facebook. So that broadly, that was the good side of social platforms and the internet as a whole. It's only in the last 3 or 4 years that we're realizing the evil side of all of this, right? So now we're grappling with it. And how do we respond? Should it be technology? Should it be self-regulation? Should it be government regulation, what you hinted earlier?
Yeah.
I think we are, and what people like me are saying is that while we do all of that or think about that, focus on the demand side, which is that, train ourselves to better manage and understand this phenomenon, which is now part of our lives. I mean, I'm clearly one of those who has studied, gone through school in a pre-internet generation.
Right.
There are many who have, for them, internet has been part of their lives almost from the day they've been born. Typically, anyone who's more than who's let's say 15 years old today, or even maybe 17 or 18 years old today, has been born with the internet. It's a very different life. It's a very different life. Some of us, who I'm assuming are a little older, may not completely realize it. We understand it, but we may not completely realize it. So therefore, a life wherein the internet itself has to be treated differently and questioned and so on is new. But we have to work towards that, and we have to work with platforms and so on. So it's not about which platform, because assuming one platform completely reforms itself or does something magical, but there will be another platform, and there are. So the problem will not go away. The problem about bringing together millions of people where things are flowing and flying around at very, very high speeds, at warp speed, information, and good and bad information, that is something that will continue to be there. So we have to, treat it and work with it and fight it in a way that we are maybe part of the problem and the solution.
If I have this one thought. Okay, if you would look at, I think this might be an oversimplification, but if you look at fake news as, say, a modern day representation of gossiping, which is I think a fundamentally human quality, then is our approach, like you said, with machine learning and so on and so forth, it's tech based for a tech problem, what we're seeing as a tech problem. But is there a sociological aspect to this as well that should be tackled?
Can you define that when you say sociological?
No, like for instance, it's a behavior, right? If you would, like I said, I don't know if this is an oversimplification, but if you would say that the spreading fake news is like gossiping, right? It's like the human, a very human behavior. It has existed since we could communicate with each other as a species. If you, so that is not necessary. That's a sociological problem, right? I mean, it's not necessarily a problem. It's a problem when it's weaponized. But if you go to its root, the reason why we would spread, say, orange juice dissolves nails and it dissolves your stomach lining, all the way to this community does this because they are evil. It's a form of gossiping. So
I agree. No, I get what you're saying. So yes, I mean, you're right. People, when I forward something without verifying, I am in a way gossiping. And I don't know if it's a deep sociological problem or it's just basic human nature.
Yeah. No, I meant it's human nature. So how do you begin to address that?
I think it's the same thing, but I mean, by how do I educate you to be more careful, to verify things that you come across before forwarding them, or even believing them, and always question everything that you come across, particularly if it comes across in this in inorganic way or through your inboxes, social media.
Govind, I think, and this is, I'm only a little bit joking over here, but I think you guys, just as we have been able to, as a society, kind of bring discredit and shame to things like misogyny and sexism and homophobia, etc., I think we should begin a campaign to shame fake news spread as well.
Yeah, I guess so. No, absolutely. I think we do that in some ways when we go after, let's say, quote unquote, influencers who do it. And we find that having an impact. I mean, that's one of the ways we've had an impact when we've called out people consistently for spreading, and we've seen that they've become more careful. At least some of them. There are others who are shameless because it's a strategic objective for them. That's different. But I think there are others who have realized that they have to be careful. They have to take their own positions of fame in society far more responsibly.
How worried are you about essentially the advancement in technology of fake news, as in deep fakes and stuff like that, which are getting much better by the day? So how do you think a fact-checking platform like yours will grapple with these sort of deep fakes and deep fake voice things coming in?
So I think deepfake is one version of the new sort of technology input into into fake news. It's tough, except that, I mean, you can only apply a filter and say that could he have said it, or if it was Obama, for instance, which was one of the most famous deepfakes, or Nancy Pelosi, or someone else, and verify. Could could you know that this is true or not true? I don't, you remember there was these Time magazine covers, which showed Trump, and most of them were aimed at Trump. And the first few couple, everyone believed, because no one thought that, this could be fake. And then, of course, you realize, and it was found that it was almost like an industry. Every other day, there would be one new Time magazine cover. So it comes back to self-training from a consumption point of view. Obviously, it's easier for us to spot it if we come across, but we have not seen so many instances of deepfakes. I think while everyone acknowledges that as a problem, we've not seen so many instances, at least in India. I think what we see is still more primary level, let's say, video manipulation, text, images, and even audio in some cases. Deepfakes take some effort to produce. I mean, maybe no one is putting that kind of effort here, or even globally. I mean, while the problem is big, realistically, I've not seen that impact, so much of an impact right now.
Okay. I think, we've only had one publicized case, which was, I think, during the Delhi election.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, of deepfakes.
Yeah.
Wow, Govind, that was an action-packed podcast. We've got so much information. We've managed to squeeze in so much information into this 45-minute recording that we've done. I don't think, Tushar, have we been this action-packed before? I don't think so.
The good thing is I think we've not faffed at all in this one. We've just gone point by point, fact by fact.
I think also this is a compliment to Govind's clarity of thought.
Very kind. So so we have a WhatsApp helpline where you can forward your posts which you want fact checked. The number is 7700 906 588.
Okay, and we'll put this into the description of the podcast, so that people can. I'll take this number from you separately, and we'll put this in the description of the podcast.
Yeah,
so that people can. So how does this helpline work? I'm sorry.
So you suppose you have a piece of a forward that you want fact checked. You just send it to this helpline, and it's being tracked. So if it's something that we can do, we can check and verify, we do so, and then we also broadcast it back.
Okay.
If there is a finding.
Okay.
And it's an interactive thing. So it's actually the helpline is in partnership with WhatsApp.
All right. Okay.
So everyone listening in, please use this helpline if you get the chance. And I think that pretty much covers everything we wanted to discuss, right, Joel?
Yeah, man.
Action-packed bit, yeah. So I think just before we go, I just like to say, if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out our other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Govind, your handles on Instagram and Twitter are?
And I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook either.
Okay.
I am on Twitter at Govind Ethiraj.
Okay. And of both the websites, Fact Checker and Boom?
www.boomlive.in and www.factchecker.in.
All right. Joel?
Yeah, I'm Pereira Joel on Twitter, and joelpereira.esq on Instagram.
All right, I'm Yono Please on Twitter and Tushar_Ravi on Instagram. I hope you liked this episode. Thank you so much, guys. We will see you again. Bye.
Thanks, Govind. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Joel. Thank you, Tushar. Pleasure talking to you guys, and as always, being on an IVM podcast platform.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Have you ever wondered how successful people do their thing? How do they navigate the challenges they often face? Are you wondering about the future of restaurants, film, education, technology, and everything else in between? Hi, I'm Gauri Devidayal, best known for being one of the brains behind The Table, an award-winning restaurant in Bombay. One thing my life as a restaurateur has given me is the opportunity to meet with some truly inspiring people, most often just by chatting with strangers at the community table. And that's what this podcast is about. It's about learning the new dimensions of business and understanding how different people swim this sea. It's an opportunity for me to pick their brains and ask them all the questions on my mind, whether it's about learning from their past experiences or talking about future trends. Through their journeys, stories, and insights, I hope you too, like me, will come away inspired and energized. So come, join me every Wednesday with your favorite drink, because this round is on me.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.